this year of 2022, we are taking up as a general theme being truly human. So we're taking up today the consideration of the topic, a beacon light. And there was an article that came out called L'Affaire Inconnue, which roughly translates to the beacon light. It's the sort of like the unknown beacon, is the direct translation, I believe. And that was penned by Helena Blavatsky, whose birthday we're celebrating this week on Thursday, August 11th. And so we're going to look at it from the lens of Irish mysticism by an Irish mystic himself, George William Russell. And to do that, we're going to ask Robert Moore, who has, I think, read quite a bit of George William Russell's work many times over the last so many decades.
It's one of those things about the longer you live, the older you get. It's just a curious problem. Hey, Donna, would you read the quote for the week from George William Russell?
A beacon light. Our courage, our faith, might cause our light to shine in some other heart, which as yet has no light of its own. George William Russell.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that that was read because the considerations that I've had have all focused on this idea of, in some sense, the transmission of light, to be a beacon light. And in the way he puts it, our courage, our love, our persistence can help sustain our fellow human beings, especially those that we love and care about. So, and last week, there was a consideration of how every human being is both a receiver and a transmitter. So we're kind of approaching it from that idea. I started out with the source of light in a human being from the Bible, that many are perhaps familiar with this. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, from the Gospel of John. And by the by, a lot of these slides are accompanied by a painting by George William Russell, like this one right here, which gives a portrait of light, divine light. And you compare the living person to a corpse, and you realize there's a striking amount of light that comes out of every human being. But that light gets colored a lot, right? I mean, if someone's angry at you, you just as soon not look them in the eye. So that true light gets colored. But ultimately, there is this spark of the divine light within every human being. And that is a critical idea for George William Russell. This is the one quote I have from Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and where she talks about, if we're going to see this spiritual light, it has to be through the aid of our seventh or synthetic sense. That's the sense in which we can see the light of true wisdom. And the reason I put this in here is that if you think about this, it doesn't have anything to do with names or organizations or anything like that. This is accessible to every single human being. And the sense in which they would say a theosophist or someone who has divine wisdom would be strictly a matter of whether they have awakened the spiritual senses. It would not have to do with any kind of external token. Now, this is George William Russell, and what I'm going to be showing in the slides is various quotes from an article that he wrote called "The Hero in Man." And the hero in man is that light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. And I assume you realize that that means every man and woman, because man here has to do with the immortal self-conscious principle in the human being. Now, this is the one, a couple of pictures were not done by Russell, and this was not done by him. But his hero in man, he starts out with him talking about living in two worlds simultaneously. The objective world, to which we're familiar with and we take so much for granted as real, and the inner life, our subjective life, all our feelings and impressions and intuition. So he was moving down the street, and he says, my mind was also journeying on a way of its own. In fact, sometimes, we can be walking along completely oblivious to our external environment. And the things which were bodily present before me were no less with me in my unseen traveling. Every now and then a transfer would take place, and some of the moving shadows in the street would begin walking about in the clear interior light. So there's a movement to a subjective perception. And in these kind of perceptions of inward light, it's like everything comes at once. So he says there's a difficulty in choosing between what is first and what is last to say. But interpreting as best I can, I seem to behold the onward movement of a light, one among many lights, all living, throbbing, now dim with perturbations, and now again clear, all subtly woven together, outwardly in some more shadowy shining, and inwardly in a greater fire, which, though it was invisible, I knew to be the lamp of the world. So he's having a sense that the light that light us all comes from a single light. Here he puts as the lamp of the world. So, we could call that a single beacon. So this is, by the by, fundamental to most religions, that we come from a single source. And it is the basis for that feeling of unconditional love. And again, these are all paintings of his. And I picked these paintings to just give some sense of what he's talking about in the quote, but they're obviously not quite the same. Here, this man is looking at a nature spirit. And I had mentioned to Renee that P.L. Travers, the author of Mary Poppins, was a good friend of George William Russell. And he would be painting these pictures of fairies and nature spirits. And she found it so frustrating to sit there and not be able to see them. It was clear to his vision, but not to hers. He spent about 10 years, by the by, painting, devoting himself to painting. Until then, he felt like he could be of greater service doing other activities. But he always, once he contacted Theosophy and H.P. Blavatsky, he always looked to H.P. Blavatsky as his teacher, as showing him how to use his talents, to understand his talents and how to use them for the good of the world. So every imagination of man is the opening or closing of a door to the divine world. Now he is solitary, cut off, and seemingly to himself on the desert and distant verge of things. And then his thought throws open the shut portals. He hears the chant of the seraphs in his heart. And he is made luminous by the lighting of a sudden aureole. So here, we're talking about, he's talking about mystic awakenings of visions, of light that, he in turn would then use to shed light on other people. There sometimes comes on us a mood of strange reverence for people and things, which, in less contemplative hours, we hold to be unworthy. And in such moments, we may set side by side, the head of Christ and the head of an outcast. And there is an equal radiance around each, which makes of the darker face a shadow and is itself a shadow around the head of light. So again, the real theme is the light that lighteth every person. And then when you have a perception, when you're functioning from that perception and you perceive that in others, from that standpoint, there's equality. It's like the Christ soul in each. And if you read the poem on Krishna that was sent out, that I always thought, I didn't know that poem was entitled Krishna. I always thought he was talking about Christ. So I was kind of surprised when I found that he named it Krishna. We feel such deep pity for the fallen that there must needs be a justice in it. For these diviner feelings are wiser in themselves and do not vaguely arise. So here, for me, from what I understand of Vladimir Putin of Russia, that to me is the person that's gone way wrong, right? And causing a lot of pain and suffering. But this would be the Christ feelings that we have. And asking myself why it is that the meanest are safe from our condemnation when we sit on the true seat of judgment in the heart. It seemed to me that their shield was the sense we have of a nobility hidden in them under the cover of ignoble things. So back of all this is something infinitely soothing, a light that does not wound, which says no harsh thing. Even all the darkest of the spirits turns to it in its agony. For the darkest of human spirits has still around him this first glory, which shines from a deeper being within, whose history may be told as the legend of the hero and man. So that's the title of this essay by Russel. He's trying to talk about various levels of consciousness that have to do with wisdom and ignorance, light and darkness, to the extent that we communicate with each other. Christ is incarnate in all humanity. Prometheus is bound forever within us. They are the same. They are a host, and the divine incarnation was not spoken of one, but all those who, descending into the lower world, tried to change it into the divine image. Now, this is a basic theosophical principle that Christ is the divine light in each is the Christ principle that we all share. And Jesus Christ was the ultimate expression of that light in us. Here he's saying it's in every heart. The story of one is the story of all. So the Titan and crucified are humanity. Their gigantic sorrows companion his own. And in contemplating them, he awakens what is noblest in his own nature. Or in other words, in understanding their divine heroism, he understands himself. So that all the divine incarnations, all the noblest heroes of humanity are really like ideals that show us what we ourselves are destined to be. So he says, what we need is that interior tenderness shall be elevated into seership, that what in most is only yearning or blind love shall see clearly its way and hope. To this end, we have to observe more intently the nature of the interior life. So in this painting of his, it shows a child, which reminded me when a child is content of the remarkable tenderness that one finds in children, which of course is ourselves. We were once children. We still have that interior tenderness. This kind of ties into the quote for the week from Russell. What shall be done to quiet the heart cry of the world? There is in truth an inner alliance between the soul who would fain give and the soul who is in need. Nature has well provided that not one golden ray of all our thoughts is sped ineffective through the dark. Not one drop of the magical elixirs love distills is wasted. So this is a very interesting and inspiring thought. Our love and goodwill and considerations for others has actually a positive effect upon them. He says that love, eros, is a being. It is more than a power of the soul, though it is that also. It has a universal life of its own. Once the soul has attained to any possession like love, persistent will, or faith, or a power of thought, it comes into spiritual contact with others who are struggling for these very powers. So all our struggles to attain any kind of significant virtue joins in a field of light and aspiration with other human beings who are likewise struggling. So that living light, having found its way into the being of any one person, does not rest there, but sends its rays and extends its influence on and on to illumine the darkness of another nature. So it comes that there are ties which bind us to people other than those we meet in our everyday life. So this intent focus on the inner life, that all the moods and feelings that we go through are often bound up with a lot of people that we are not exactly directly aware of. And this is kind of the bodhisattvic or the Jesus or Buddha-like nature. The soul shedding its light like rays of glory, seeming itself of a ring of wounded spears. It sent forth love, and the arrowy response came hate impelled. It whispered peace and was answered by the clash of rebellion. And to all this, for defense, it could only bear more and more openly its heart, that a profounder love from the mother nature might pass through upon the rest. Read this quote, and I can't help think of the crucifixion image, where in the Bible, Christ says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
Robert, that was just breathtakingly beautiful.
Well, that's George William Russell for you, isn't it?
Well, I don't mean just visually, just the way that you were able to meld his words and his images, and to present that to us with that theme of light threading through the entirety. Can you tell us a little bit about his life? I think he was he a labor union leader or something like that for a while?
Oh, yeah, later in life. He's part of the Irish Renaissance and good friends of William Butler Yeats. But, he was with various periodicals and newspapers, editor and writing for those for quite a while. And he was a nationalist. He worked for Irish independence, but always in a non-violent way. And he was able to resolve one, I forget exactly what it's called, one violent event that took place and settle something about the conflicting parties. But later, towards the end of his life, he did work for the government in the capacity of they were like agricultural co-op unions, where he went around and it was an attempt to try and help the farmers to work together and join their resources and both, not their knowledge, not just physical resources, but their knowledge and skills with one another. And he pretty much spent most of the end of his life doing that. He felt like that's what he had to do. Had to move away from all the mystic visions to practical work.
I at least think of somebody who's has a mystic nature is going to, as they go further and further into their life, want to withdraw more into that mystic side of themselves. So it's interesting that he wanted to counteract that probably fairly strong tendency. And it would be from that feeling, I imagine, of suffering for his fellow human beings, and that he would want to relieve.
He had some genuine wisdom, he had some genuine insight into the spiritual nature of humanity. So he wasn't looking at a bunch of personalities, he was looking at us as light, spiritual light.
That was trapped in some way.
Yeah, well, somehow it comes out, right? Like it's just stunning to think about. I hope it's not offensive to think about looking in the eyes of a corpse. There's no light coming out of those eyes. It's just a way to appreciate that light does come out of our eyes, and that there is light within us.
So let's see what other people think about this idea of light, this concept of a beacon light. Sometimes I think we've heard of beacon lights along hilltops, and one light will shine on, and then the next light will see it, and then they'll put their light on, and then that will reach the next hilltop and reaches the next one. And he says something about that the living light does not rest in one person, but sends its rays on and on to influence the rest.
Right. Yeah, it seems like these are not new themes to GEMS. Like you're taking up this theme over and over again. So all must have some perspective on it.
I would think so. Yeah, Maurice.
Well, some of you might help me, but there is that circumstance in that phrase which says that if there are 2 or 3 people genuinely thinking of me, and it could be Jesus, it could be Buddha, that kind of matrix, that you can bring light down like a focus, not on oneself, of course, but on other people. And maybe you or Robert can restate what I just said, because I'm not sure I got the quote right, and then maybe someone could comment on that.
I think it's if 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah, there am I also. Well, I would just make the comment when he says in my name, mystically, sound and light are interchangeable. So you could rather say my light is there also.
I was thinking, where or when did Western man get so far off track? Because he's describing, very ancient wisdom. Hindus had it going on, long before. And you wonder how we lost track of the fact that the divine spark is who we really are. When did they go so far astray that Russell and others like Blavatsky were introducing this sort of new idea into the Western mind that apparently had gotten off on some dark alley somewhere. But somewhere in your conversation, it made me think of this idea of as above, so below, this microcosm, macrocosm idea. So I looked it up in Wikipedia. I said, as above, so below, and I scrolled through, and who's in there under that is Blavatsky herself, happened to be in the Wikipedia entry for that. So I don't know, I'm sure how that all tied together. You also introduced the idea that we are all tied together, right? That nothing is wasted. Everything that we do affects everyone and everything else in this matrix, which very much resembles how the brain works. And so, the neural firing goes through when you do something one time, but you do it 3 or 4 times and the thing gets stronger. So this idea, this multiplicity making it stronger. So when 2 or more are gathered in his name, there is love is the way that I heard that quote. But it's this building of power because we all are from the source and we all have that power.
Interestingly, when you say that, what comes to mind to me is we were never there. I don't think just because we had these great wisdom keepers and prophets, I don't think humanity ever reached it. And I think the idea is, just carried down from tradition so that it can hopefully someday actually be put into practice. And maybe with all the technology we have now to connect all these points of life, points of light in ourselves, maybe we're moving towards that. And maybe we begin to spread the word, so to speak, on an interfaith, ecumenical, secular level, that this is really the way the physical world works, that we are all connected to each other, that when we put our lights together, it gets stronger. Why do 2 have to be together before God is there? What does that say? That by yourself, you may not have the power to really tap into the energy that you're connected to. But when you put yourself together with others, even just with one other, suddenly you have the creative force of the creator of the universe. Yeah. So I continue to look at this as, once again, the ancient wisdom teaching us where we want to go, rather than we forgot it and now let's go back to it, and keep hoping that the collective forces that we bring together at this time in life may be either stoking the fires enough to actually get us to believe, to live what we believe or what we know in some aspect of our minds, treat that as reality and go from there. And I love the way we keep finding so many different people who have said it over so many periods. Jesus said it, and we think people were listening, but it's obvious, and look at history, there weren't enough. So I just see it as a call to let's us think about it. What can we do, and can we push it over the edge, in our lifetimes?
I think we have to really think of it in terms of our leavening the whole loaf. It doesn't take very much yeast to leaven the whole loaf, at least a little bit. I mean, the fact that, we put okay, now we're going to hold gems from the wisdom traditions. And we've got 17 people here to consider this marvelous topic with this, incredible Irish mystic who was so filled with light and compassion. and he sparked up so much leaps within me. I mean, he's just somebody who makes me really excited, and always has ever since I first read The Hero and Man that Robert was referring to. So for me, to try to look at why doesn't everybody in the whole world get it? Well, why would we need to be here if we all got it? But you know, if we're making some progress and we can see it on the small, that's pretty encouraging, I think, to me. It's encouraging to me to see all of you. Diana?
In my belief system, I believe we are all one, and that we are divine light and divine love, and that our bodies are temples to our soul or our light. And I think that more and more people, and I think there have been mystics and monks and people throughout lifetimes that are doing that. But what came to me is that, you know, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if people are on survival mode, sometimes they don't have there's two things. Sometimes they do just live in the light and they live in the present moment, and they are, you know, it's like Ram Dass, when he went to India, said they were all suffering, but when he went there, they were all sharing their light in a different way, even though it had nothing. But I also believe that many times when you're in survival mode and you've got children and you've got all the things going on, you forget about that faith and trust in that light and to surrender to it. And I think there's something around more and more people, even knowing what we feel. You know, Jung only came about 50 years or 60 years ago, that we can really have a time that we can discuss feelings and thoughts, and, you know, not just be on survival mode. And I think that more and more people are learning about sharing their light and love, and even this group, and being able to be open. And I think part of what happens is that we see so much pain and suffering in the world and so much negativity. It's like, how do we continue to let our light shine? And I think we just do that through love and compassion throughout our day and what we're doing. And that's why I think, like, for me, prayer and meditation are really important, because we go beneath our name and our status, and we touch into that. And the more that we all take that time to really acknowledge that, the more the light's going to grow.
I kind of feel like there's so much negativity projected out there through the social media and all other kinds of media that we're generally exposed to, that if we buy into it, we are succumbing to what they have to push. Whereas when we have our everyday interactions with one another, and we can feel that tenderness of heart between one another and between each other, when we're, you know, if we're at the grocery store, or, you know, if we're standing in line to get our driver's license or whatever, there are still some very tender interactions that take place, or we see somebody helping somebody else, and I just feel like we don't have to buy into the negativity that is out there. It's not the whole story. That's just a little axe I have to grind.
I think we have to be aware of it. You know, the
Yes.
truth is, I think many people say, well, I'm just going to be in the light. And I love that, you know, but I also want to know what's going on in the world, so that I'm not coming in a vacuum. But if I live from that fear and that and don't live in faith and trust and the light, then I'm adding that frequency to the world. And I think all of us need to add more of the love and light frequency. But I think that being aware of what's going on, but like you said, not buying into it, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, we have to realize what's going on in Ukraine right now, for example. And I'm wondering what's going on within Ukraine that is so light-filled that would knock our socks off if we knew about it. And Donna?
I think there were just some really wonderful ideas that were related to my question, but I was struck when Robert said that of AE, that it was H.P. Blavatsky who taught him how to understand, or taught humanity, I guess, how to understand one's talents and how to use them. So I was wondering, in relationship to this last question, you know, that we're all, say, innately centers of light, what that might have been, what maybe George William Russell would have said he learned from her directly related to that.
What, trying to understand the question, what Russell directly learned from HVB about what?
Well, you said that he learned from her how to understand one's talents and how to use them. Not just him. He said that she taught how
Well,
to.
no, I was actually just talking about him. I mean, because he was a mystic, you know, he had all these visions of extraordinary experiences that, you know, were not the normal run of the mill life. And so by studying what HBB was expounding, he could put that in a philosophical context. And then likewise, he learned that he had to use his capacities, or that his purpose in life was to use his capacities to help his fellow man in the best ways that he could think of. So that was something, you know, of course, she could do that for, or any divine philosophy could do that for anybody. But that in particular was very helpful to him personally. So he was very dedicated.
Jenny?
I was wondering, you had that quote, something about we want to be able to have these intimations we have of our more mystical selves to be bright, flashing presences, or a brighter, more flashing awareness. And did he, for instance, I mean, what else? How did he elaborate on that idea in the sense of perhaps using our minds is one question. The other thing is, was brought up by one of the commenters, well, have we really forgotten anything about our divine nature? And that whole issue, did Russell write about reminiscence and how to develop soul recollection of soul memories?
Good question, and I must tell you, I am no George William expert or scholar. You know, I read his work, but a lot of, like, as you, the quotes, the reason I put in on those quotes is because he's suggestive, right? He actually attempted to create an alphabet and a language to express mysticism. That's one thing I know about him, of which he said he utterly failed. But the point is that when he is writing, he's writing in a way that is suggestive to our inner perception. So in that sense, that's what the mystics do. That's what the prophets do. That's what those who know, those who have wisdom do. They have to suggest that things in ways that awaken our inner perception. So that's the best that they can do, because they're talking about our soul life, which is connected to a physical life, but it's has a different language and different fields of meaning. Like a single, well, you know, you just take, it's significant to me. Like, I've always enjoyed in Bible when Jesus, a woman gives, you know, what he calls a mite, a small amount of money, but it's all she has. So that little thing that she did had immense consequences for the spiritual welfare of humanity. That little thing, because she gave all she had. So, in other words, the language of the soul is not the language of commerce or pleasure and pain or things like that. You know, so much of reward and punishment, that kind of thing. It doesn't look that way. It doesn't judge in that sense. So, so that these people like Russell can only suggest to us ways to awaken our deeper intuition. But what he's pointing to, what he's trying to awaken in us, I think, and what every divine teacher does is that to awaken that sense of our common humanity, which is a light that we share. It's a whole field that we share. And we also share it at lower levels. To me, it should be not too difficult in our day and age, since we're doing it right now. You can jump all over the world in the World Wide Web of the internet, right? It's just an electronic medium. Well, why should not our subjectivity extend to around the whole world as well? Why should we not connect with people whose thought and sympathies are with our own? So anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense. Oh, Bob, are you ask a question?
Yeah, I know at one of your slides you referred to the bodhisattvic ideal.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, especially just now about sort of inner wisdom, what in Buddhism is called prajna wisdom, the prajna light is a metaphor that we use in Buddhism. We talk about the three jewels. And I think it's interesting to see the interrelationship of those jewels. The first jewel is Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature, which means we have that inherent prajna understand. Then we have the Dharma, to sort of realize that how we move beyond intellectual knowledge, but actually kind of understand how it works. For example, in the Dhammapada, it says, if you do one small bit of good, how can you fail to affect everyone? If you do one negative thought, how can you fail not to affect everyone? So that's kind of the working of Dharma. But it strikes me as interesting that Sangha, connecting to others, is so critical. I mean, one thing the Buddha said is, don't hide your light under a basket. If you do, it's almost like the ego, you've still got the light, but it doesn't go anywhere. You've got to kind of, through the Dharma, extend it out. And so, as Renee said, there are all these negative things, but it's still up to us whether or not we then put our light under a basket or we extend it out. And that strikes me as the dynamic between the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
The Bodhisattva ideal in a way is just that if you come in as a reformer, like a real spiritual being, then you're going to get a reaction from all those interests that are very selfish and self-centered. So all that reaction will come down on you. But the Bodhisattva then just releases more love, more light.
Yeah, the Bodhisattva of compassion has 1,000 arms, not just one, to do all of the good that needs to be done. And here's the cries of the world. That's, again, as Renee was saying, we need to know what's going on about the climate. We need to know what's going on in war. We need to know what's going on with economic injustice, racism. All that stuff is out there to know. And we've got arms to do things.
Yeah. And our arms are a lot like our fellow human beings, right? Like you're one of my arms and I'm one of your arms.
Well, and we have tools in those arms that again interact. One of my hands fits the axe handle exactly, and I can, do what I do with that tool. And that kind of, tools, into, I think, as you say, relate to a give and take of reciprocity.
The Jim Tepfer, who participates here often, he mentioned yesterday in Plato's Republic how Plato was very much that humanity does not do well on its own. Like just a single human being, life is very difficult. But if you actually, each person, you take advantage of each person's skills and you're actually working together. I don't know why this is so repulsive to us. It's such an enjoyable experience to work together and learn from each other. And what's so great about accumulating things and fighting each other? I don't know.
Plato also gave the myth of the cave, where most of us are basically just looking at the shadows, in which case we don't see the light. Yeah. So that's part of the problem. Most people don't see light. We're blinded by it as an initial experience, because in some ways it's a unique experience to finally see light, prajna, a bit of understanding. There is a sense where, as our egos tie us down or make us face the wall and the shadows.
Judy.
Yes, well, speaking of light, does George William Russell speak at all of the idea of the light of the Logos, which in John 1 is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And this, I think, is a reference really to the third Logos of the secret doctrine, in which the light manifests in men, because it also says the light that was coming into the world lighteth every man. Well, in the Orthodox Christian tradition, that means the Christ. But it also says, that every person really has the light of the Logos in them and the Christos principle. And that seems to be something that you were going into with Russell's work, although I haven't read enough of it to fully understand his connections to theosophy. So I wonder if you could elaborate more on that.
He does draw also on a lot of Irish mythology and imagery. But in the Hero Man, when he starts talking about Prometheus or Christ, that they are incarnated in all humanity, that is the light of the Logos. That these hosts of divine being are actually the source of our own self-consciousness, and in some sense are ourselves. Like Jesus says, my Father and me are one. And of course, there are other times he talks about them being separate, but that is the paradox of, the mystic life, of unity and separation at the same time.
If you think of the Christ light as the universal energy of the world, and you think of God or Christ as omnipresent, then God has to be in every cell of everybody's body. So the same energy, the same light, it only makes sense. In fact, nothing else makes sense than that we all have the same capacity to shine that light, like a drop in the ocean. Is one drop more important than the other? And of course, what's really important is the whole. I see it as, if you believe any part of it, if you believe people who, all these incredibly brilliant people who intuitively reach the same conclusion, you sort of have to conclude that that's what it is. And that's why bringing all the drops of water or all the points of light together can have such a huge impact. And one other thing, we were talking about how how many people, we can't get everybody. Or there's a book, shoot, I forgot the name. Anyway, it says that once 10% of the people have the same idea, it's on its way to becoming mainstream. And when 20% of the people get it, it is mainstream. And I thought that was really fascinating. It kind of goes into the 100th monkey, idea that once 100 monkeys got it on one island, the idea spread to the other island. And I don't know, I can't show you evidence for it, but I really like that concept. And it made me not worry about the people who are not shining light or who are in the darkness. If you only got to get 10% to then be on your way to get 20%, and then we're there,
Yeah, well, that's what Renee said. We're trying to leaven the whole.
And Roger is somebody who has done so much work in that regard. And I think the more that we actually put our efforts in that direction, it's a little bit like, I mean, you hear this thing about when you're pregnant, you look around and it looks like, oh, there's so many pregnant people around me. And so there's something about when we're putting our efforts into these positive light-filled directions, all of a sudden we actually do see more light.
You taught us a great deal, not only about Irish mysticism, but it's connected to H.P. Blavatsky and the whole general idea of what a mystic can do with his or her life, not only seek the truth, but serve humanity. And I think George William Russell, or AE, is a good example of that, and you brought it out very well. So I thank you on behalf of us all.
I think so too. And I so appreciate, in addition to everything that Judy has just said, how you showed specific quotes from AE and these gorgeous paintings of his that, one of the things I think that they do is to awaken in each of us, okay, maybe we're like P.L. Travers, who wrote Mary Poppins, and we can't actually see fairies and paint them the way that AE did. And yet, each of us has some sort of capacity to see something of the invisible, to see something deeper and finer in nature and in each other, and to just listen with more wide open ears and to have a little bit greater sense of the light. And AE, to me, does that. And I'm so glad for those gorgeous pictures and words that you shared, Robert. So appreciative of all of you who joined today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert.